Generous God, may your truth be known this day and forever. O Holy One, you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, last week we really started going in depth with our conversation on stewardship. And because most of us need to do some unlearning on this topic, we talked about what stewardship is and what it isn't. And now this week I bring for us maybe a more succinct definition we can work with. So stewardship is practicing accountability and responsibility while acknowledging God as creator and giver of everything we have. Stewardship is what we do for God with the gifts God has given us. Our scripture today, I think, really helps us understand the difference between stewardship and charity. Charity is giving our old clothes to the clothing bank, putting our spare change in the bucket, or cleaning out our cupboards for the food pantry. Charity is good, but it's only a part of the practice of stewardship. You see, charity comes from our leftovers, right? Charity is what the rich people were doing when they were very conspicuously putting all their noisy coins into the temple coffers. They were giving their spare change, which was a lot, but it was still just their leftovers. Stewardship, by definition, involves some sacrifice. The widow, with her 2 pennies, wasn't giving very much, especially in comparison to the rich folks. But her sacrifice was much greater. So last week, I finally tracked down the yoga classes here in town. This relates, I promise. It only took me about 2 years to get around to finding them, even though I really have missed doing yoga. I used to do yoga several times a week in college, but I knew, getting back into it, I was not going to just pick up where I'd left off. Like stewardship, yoga is a practice because it takes practice. And when you don't practice, you get rusty. I've been feeling it. Now, our teacher here is always telling us, we do these poses, yes, but the poses also do us. As we twist and stretch and bend into different yoga poses, the poses begin to reshape and retrain our bodies. And isn't it just the same with the practice of stewardship? As we practice accountability and responsibility with God's gifts, as we work to trust God a little more each day, give a little more to God, we begin to be shaped by that practice. It becomes less scary, less painful. But just like we have to do with our bodies, we need to push ourselves. If I were to stop stretching when it felt uncomfortable, I would never gain any ground, right? I'd never stretch any farther, and I wouldn't be getting all the benefits out of my practice. Well, the same is true for running and lifting. You've got to go a little bit farther than you think you can. Do one more rep. If we stop as soon as we reach our comfort limit, we'll never improve, right? And so it is with stewardship. If we never push ourselves beyond our comfort and fear, if we aren't making sacrifices to God, really sacrificing, we'll never get to see how God was planning to provide. We'll never get the benefits. It's easy when we're desperate or scared or hurting to start rationalizing away our faith. What difference would my little bit make? Well, other things came up this week. I'll get back on track next week. I deserve a break once in a while anyway. God will understand. You see, the problem, though, with all of these rationalizations are that they're focused in the wrong place. They all assume that we give, that we practice stewardship for the sake of others, for the church, or even God. We forget that the point of practicing stewardship is to work on ourselves. It's for our own good, to grow spiritually into a more generous and faithful life. I found a great quote from seminary professor Henry Langnick. He put it into perspective for me. He said, "The story of the widow's offering suggests that faithful giving and faithful living is not for the sake of the recipient, but rather for the sake of, or maybe it would be more accurate to say, it proceeds organically from the life of the giver. If the ends are assured in God's economy, then only the means remain." The ends are assured in God's economy, so only the means remain. In high school, I had a friend who was really smart, and he desperately wanted to go to Cornell for pre-med, as his mom had. She was a doctor and made good money. They were definitely comfortable as a family, and his dad was able to mostly just do a few side jobs, but he took care of the home and the kids. He was the first stay-at-home dad I'd ever met. It was cool. He was also the lay leader at their church. So when it came time for my friend to go to college, he applied and, of course, got into Cornell. But when he received his acceptance package, his parents sat him down and said, "We just can't afford to send you to such an expensive school." He didn't believe that this could be possible. His mother was a doctor, after all. So he said, "Show me the numbers," because the numbers don't lie, remember? And when he looked at his family's budget for the first time, he was astounded that his parents actually tithed. He fought with them for months, begging them to just reduce their giving to the church, just by a little bit, just for the 4 years he'd be at Cornell. But every time, they calmly refused. He became bitter and angry and treated them really poorly. I can only imagine now, looking back, how agonizing that must have been for them. He couldn't understand how they could care more about their church than their own son. But you know, I think they knew he could get a great education at any number of less expensive schools. But in standing their ground and not caving in, they were teaching him an incredibly valuable lesson he wasn't going to get anywhere else. And that lesson is that our commitment to God has to come first. It has to. If we're going to claim a faith, we have to actually live it and trust that God will take care of the rest. Now, my friend ended up going to BU, and he's a successful doctor himself. But he's still bitter that he didn't get to go to Cornell, despite having met his wife and lots of long-lasting friends at BU. He still hasn't learned the lesson, but I have hope that someday he will. But we have to know that even to our own children, this life of faithful living and giving sacrificially, it looks crazy. It looks crazy to people who don't know God. It probably looks even crazier than the craziest people I know, those ultra-marathon runners who train for years to run 150-mile races. That level of dedication that it takes to do that, that starts to look a little insane, right? They become defined by what they do. They're known as a crazy running lady. But isn't that just exactly what we want to? As Christians, don't we want to be known as those crazy, generous people? Don't we want to become defined to the rest of the world by our commitment and dedication to the great God who gave us life? Don't we want our lives to be totally about the great marathon of faith? We better start training. And just like with physical training, any activity is better than none. But if we really want to improve, if we really want to go all the way and push ourselves, we've got to dig deep and call on God to help us and trust in our promises that we get through our faith. So may we practice our faith a little each day, pushing ourselves a little farther than the day before. Not to show off or to try and impress God, but may we do it for our own good. May we push ourselves to better ourselves and grow deeper in our faith. Might you know the transformative power of sacrificial giving. And may you trust the one who gave you life to provide for everything you need.